education series. What we're going to try to cover today is a little bit about endowments, and instead of me up here like Charlie Brown's teacher going why about endowments, I thought I'd bring some folks that you might prefer to hear from, and they'll talk through their experience at Literacy Council Tyler, what they did with their endowment. So by way of introduction, we have to my far left, to your right, Nancy Crawford, the Executive Director of Literacy Council Tyler. Michelle Brookshire, who was still a board member, and was a board member at the time they went through this transition with their endowment, and Tracy Kenneth, who is also a board member of Literacy Council on behalf of Tyler. So I appreciate them. We had a great time last Friday talking about what we were going to talk about. So if we cover a third of that, we'll at least fill an hour. We had a good time. There's a lot that goes on that I don't necessarily see, being the organization that was housing and investing in endowment. So I knew what they were trying to accomplish, but I think they'll give you some better insights from your perspective as you deal with your board members and grapple with the issues of endowment as your organization sees what fits for us and how do we go about setting something like that up, because they've had tremendous success with that. But before we get started, I wanted to give Chris a moment to welcome us to this fine facility. So, Chris?
Hi guys, my name is Chris Rozier. I'm the Executive Director here at the Discovery Science Place. You're sitting in our annex, which oftentimes houses traveling exhibits and the like. Hopefully this past summer you got the chance to come see our Bodies Human exhibit, which was in this space at that time. We have been closed for 3 weeks, and so we just opened after some massive renovations next door, some painting and new carpeting and new exhibits. So if you haven't been to the museum in quite some time, if you get the chance today, after we meet today, if you want to run next door and just take a look, just tell them at the front desk that you were over here at the conference, and feel free to take a look around, come back, bring your kids and grandkids, and thank you, and welcome to the Discovery Science Place.
Thank you, Chris. You know, these events are becoming more popular, so we're having to move out of Genco Room. Genco Room's not able to take us, so we appreciate our neighbors here at Discovery Science Place accommodating us when we run into a situation like that. So without further ado, let's cover a little bit about what's going on. There's always somebody in the crowd that doesn't know what the Community Foundation is, so I'll give our 5-minute commercial of who we are. We're a nonprofit corporation, 501c3, public charity, just like many of your organizations. So we're tax deductible. When people make contributions directly to the Community Foundation, they get their tax deduction just like they were given to you. We serve individuals and nonprofits. So even when we talk about endowments, there are people that come to us to set up an endowment for their beloved charity, and there are nonprofit organizations that come to us and say, we want some help with our endowment, and that's the folks we serve in this 32-county area, all of Northeast Texas. We provide this idea of charitable fund administration. So there are a lot of different funds that we house at the Community Foundation and manage for people. The one we're focusing on today is the endowment fund, but there are a number of other vehicles that people use Community Foundation to help them accomplish their charitable objectives. We were founded in 1989. We're 27 years old now. In those 27 years, we've received $115 million in contributions, distributed $62 million in grants, and currently have about $79 million in assets, depending on the market for the day. Today it's good. 270 different charitable funds. About 42 million of that, or about 125 of those funds, are what we consider our endowed funds, funds intended to be invested, and the income from those funds used to accomplish a charitable objective. Another bit of housekeeping before we get too deep into endowments. East Texas Giving Day is trying to find our place. What are we going to do next year for year 2 of this? So we've been watching some of the recent activity. North Texas Giving Day just happened about 3 weeks ago. On September 22nd, they raised $37 million, 142,000 transactions using the same vendor we used. If you can believe that. We got 900 transactions.
Who's counting?
Yeah. So they've proven that the technology does work. They've never had a magnitude with North Texas Giving Day. What I learned though from North Texas Giving Day though is the bar is still rising on giving days. We don't know where the top is yet. You know, if you ever see one of these giving days start to decline, then you may think, well, we've kind of peaked somewhere in there. Last year was 33 million, this year's 37 million in the Dallas area, so they continue to grow. So buckle in. We may be doing this for a while because people are responding pretty effectively to it. Texoma gives a little more our speed in Wichita Falls area. They had an event on the 15th of September with Kimbia, raised $690,000, about 4,800 transactions. That's kind of in par. Our goal was about 3,000 to 5,000 transactions and $1 million. So I think that's still kind of communicates to me that's still realistic for East Texas. Louisville, Kentucky, also on that same day using Kimbia, 4.1 million with 21,000 transactions, no flaws in the system. Pittsburgh gives. Pittsburgh participated with us on May the 2nd, had a crash and burn. They canceled their event later that day and then came back with a new vendor, Civicor, and raised $2 million a few weeks ago, 15,000 transactions. So they thought that was good for kind of a redo in the same year. They didn't have all their nonprofits participating, but a number of them did, and they hit the $2 million mark, which is what their goal was. Omaha used Civicor back in May. They raised $8.9 million, 20,000 transactions. Colorado last December, the Civicor partner, $28 million, 124,000 transactions. So the technology worked every day, but May the 2nd. So Civicor also handles Amplify Austin, $8.5 million, 61,000 transactions. That happens in March. So what we've decided after checking out these two vendors that are most closely aligned with kind of the way we're doing Giving Day is that we're going to go with Civicor this year. So we signed a contract with Civicor. I talked to the CEO of Kimbia this morning, broke the news to him. I've let our board know, and the date we have set for next year is April 25th, 2017. Give Local America, yeah, Holly is panicked here. She may pass out this morning. April 25th, 2017 is when we're proceeding with the second annual East Texas Giving Day. So we'll see what that brings
I'm excited.
On April 25th.
I know more about giving days now than I ever dreamed.
We all know more about Giving Days than we ever thought we need to know. So there's some information on the table talking about some upcoming opportunities. In fact, I probably need to address that more fully, don't I, Holly? All right, so on October 18th, because we had a crash and burn in May, we did not get to give out all the prize money that we had available, the incentive money. So we want to do that. So here's your opportunity. If you participated in Giving Day this past year, starting October the 18th, you can go online and give us some information about your Giving Day. There's a poll. We're going to take some ideas and try to use our experience here in East Texas to educate one another so we can make this bigger and better. So that poll opens on October the 18th. It closes on November the 1st. So from the 18th to the 1st, get online there and explain a little bit about what your experience is like during Giving Day. And we're going to try to do some best practices. So then on December 13th, we're going to bring all those back together and discuss that. What worked for different people. There's obviously things we would like to change about that, but we want to mainly focus on the things that people did that really were effective. And there will be prizes awarded at that seminar. So if you participated, you still have an opportunity to receive prizes from that. Is that what I needed to cover on that? All right.
Golden.
December 13th. I get a star from my PR person today. All right. So what we're here to talk about today is endowments, the importance of endowments. Not just having an endowment. There's a number of organizations that have endowments with us. You may look at your balance sheet from time to time and see something called an endowment. But what does that mean, and how do you use that to benefit your organization? So we're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about why you need one. We're going to talk about some of the legal issues. I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. Give you some ideas to talk to your own attorney about. we'll talk about what an effective endowment looks like. So that is what our panelists are here to share with us. So I'm going to cover a few things and then we'll go into panel discussion. So my mantra is transfer of wealth. If you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times from me. The transfer of wealth is taking place in America, and East Texas is not immune to that. So as baby boomers age into retirement and pass away, they are making testamentary gifts. They're making lifetime gifts. They have to transfer their wealth. There is no option. They have 3 places they can transfer it to. They can transfer it to other people, they can transfer it to the government, or they can transfer it to a nonprofit organization, charitable organization. We want them to give everything they want to give to the people that are important to them. We want to give as little as possible as they can to the government and more to charitable organizations. So that's the idea with planning for charitable giving, planned giving. So in East Texas, we're not far off the transfer. This is the increase, basically the increase in the rate of wealth transfer, or the death rate, essentially. The amount of wealth that's transferring each year over the next 50 years is ever increasing. There are several different East Texas communities, but here in Smith County and Gregg County, kind of right there on that dark green line, which is the East Texas transfer of wealth. We're about 10% ahead of the rest of the country, meaning our population in East Texas is a little bit older and transferring a little bit faster than the rest of the country. There are other areas, these counties down here, that are experiencing quite a significant increase over the rate of the rest of the country, about a 30% increase over the U.S. as a whole. So in those communities, they could really feel that type of transfer. In numbers, what does that look like? In East Texas, the estimated wealth transfer is $188 billion. $188 billion. If you were able to talk to those people that are transferring that wealth and convince them to put 5% of that into an endowment fund for the benefit of your lovely organization, that would be $9.44 billion in new endowments. That would translate each year, because it's invested and given out income, that would translate to $471 million a year to East Texas charities. That is the importance and the potential impact of endowment. If you had an endowment, think of what it takes for you to raise that kind of money every year. You can begin building or continue building endowments for your organization to sustain them over the long haul. So the potential is there. At the Community Foundation, what I typically talk about is this upper level of the donor pyramid. So these are your annual donors down here. Many of those you're able to convert into major gift donors for major projects you have, or maybe there's a major campaign that you do every year. You consider them a major donor. To you, that may be a $100 donor, a $1,000 donor, a $10,000 donor, a major donor every year. What I like to talk about with the endowments is the top of the pyramid. So you're not really cannibalizing, and we'll talk a little bit about cannibalizing your annual giving. This is a different kind of gift, perhaps from the same individual, but it's more likely a planned gift or kind of a one-time gift rather than something that you're going back to them annually about. I like to use the illustration of if you've got somebody giving you $1,000 a year, what you really want to talk to that person about is, thank you so much for your $1,000 a year to support our cause. Would you consider us in your estate plan for a $20,000 gift? Because that $20,000 gift, properly invested, will give you that same $1,000 a year forever. So that's the link between transfer of wealth and endowment. It's those same donors. What are you going to do when they're not able to write you a check every day? Have you made provisions so that when they pass away, you're one of their favorite charities and they leave something to continue to benefit your organization? It's not the can you support us this year or would you consider a gift to this campaign, but is our organization important enough to you for you to consider us in your estate plan? So, endowment itself. It's a fund set aside to benefit an organization. The principle remains intact. That initial gift remains intact and is meant to be invested. And the income produced from those investments is what is used annual basis. There's different definitions and nuances about how you define income and how you properly invest it. And we'll get into some of that wonky stuff in a minute, talking about state law on that. Why would you have an endowment though? Let's talk about some of the reasons. Some of the fluctuating, declining annual donations that you're facing would cause you to look at that and say, boy, we need to do something to try to stabilize contributions. Maybe decreasing grant activity, could be private grants or other grants, state, federal grants that are decreasing over time. Fluctuating foundation grants. So as foundations go through different changes and emphasize different areas, maybe you're not their area of interest anymore. They're fluctuating away from you. All these result in a disruption of your programs and your inability to meet the increasing needs of the client. Our friends at hospice, anybody here from hospice today? There we go. This is what's on their website about why to have endowment. So copy and steal. It's very good. Private donations and endowments are a significant part of a stable economic future for any nonprofit organization. Thank you for including all of them. For the Hospice of East Texas, there are important factors ensuring that our organization will always be able to care for all who need us, regardless of uncertain economic environments and the constant shifts and changes in the healthcare system. If there's anything that's constantly changing, it's the healthcare system. So endowments help stabilize things. The advantages of having an endowment is that idea of stability. It also demonstrates to other people a level of responsibility and kind of maturity of your organization. And more importantly, it gives donors an opportunity to provide a different kind of gift. So there are donors that love giving to you annually. They love coming to your gala. They love sponsoring your event or your programs. But this is a different type of ask. Are you giving them the opportunity to make a planned gift or an estate gift into an endowment for the reasons it's there to support your organization? There are nonprofits that don't need to be messing with an endowment either. So what does that look like? If it's an organization that's in financial crisis, endowment is not a concern of yours right now. Donors that have, or organizations that have limited capacity to attract more donors. So if you don't have a steady pool or an increasing pool of people to draw from. Donors that have short-term or what I call anything less than permanent missions. So if it's something that's close to eradication, like there's not a whole lot of foundations being set up for polio right now because the Rotarians have almost got that knocked out globally. So it's the same type of situation. If you're trying to address an issue in your community that's not thought to be a long-term issue, you don't need to be dealing with endowment on a project basis. What are the features of endowment funds? As a community foundation, you can customize an endowment really to meet your objectives. So what is it you're trying to accomplish? You can put in a restricted purpose on an endowment. Maybe it's an endowment just for capital programs, or maybe it's this annual support bucket that you want to set up. You can control access authority, and we'll talk about that with the Literacy Council's experience. How easy is it to tap into that endowment? What are the conditions upon which that endowment can be invaded? Do you allow invasion of the principal? Can you allow invasion of the principal, and under what conditions? And anything that you put in writing or put in the minutes of your board meetings or in a document like an endowment fund agreement sends a message to future boards. What does your current board feel about endowment? And what do they need to communicate to future boards so they don't misinterpret what that fund is there for? Lots of different ways to build an endowment. You can set up a special campaign for that. You can build it into kind of annual awareness for your organization. You can designate a percentage of annual gifts to an endowment. Maybe you have a policy in place that says anything that comes in undesignated, we put into the endowment, or we put 50% of it into our endowment to grow our endowment. Memorial gifts, things like that. Lots of ways to build that. You can quiz our panelists on that too. What you need to do is know what fits your donors. What's the strategy on raising funds for the endowment. Let me talk a minute about some of the legal issues. Again, this is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, but this is my understanding in talking to a number of different attorneys and CPAs in our community as we set these types of funds up for people. There is a act referred to it as UPMIFA. It is the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. It is part of Texas state law. In fact, it's been enacted in laws in states around the country because it's fairly uniform across all 50 states. What this says, it gives us a couple of good definitions. The first one is that an endowment fund means an institutional fund or part thereof that under the terms of a gift instrument is not wholly expendable. Again, the idea of keeping some element of that intact. The term does not include assets that an institution designates as an endowment fund for its own use. So again, it's the idea of, did a donor tell you this is an endowment, or are you saying it's your money and you want to make it an endowment? That's an important distinction. Whenever a donor says that, or whenever a donor understands that, it creates a binding situation. And that can be found in this gift instrument. What was interesting about the gift instrument definition, it's a record or records, including an institutional solicitation. So if you send something to somebody, that can be the gift instrument. They reply back, they check the box that says endowment on your solicitation, and they send you a check for $1,000, that creates this endowment. And what is an endowment? An endowment is this. When there are terms in a gift instrument, somebody's trust, somebody's will, a note on somebody's check, transmittal letter that comes in with a gift, the check box that says endowment fund on your card that you send out annually, that's gift instrument. When that gift instrument designates a gift as an endowment, or a direction authorizing the gift instrument to use only income, interest, dividends, rents, issues, or profits, or to preserve the principal intact. So those are some ideas. Or words of similar import. It doesn't have to be these exact words, but something similarly phrased like that. That creates this. Creates an endowment fund of permanent duration. That is state law. So if you use just the word endowment, and you don't say, oh, it's endowment except when we want to use it for this, then you've created a permanent endowment. So that's something we have to go through periodically. And after people are gone, it's hard to correct things like that. Make sure you know exactly what they said. So if all they left you was something that said, I'm going to leave you a gift and I want you to use the income from that for your organization. Well, they just created a permanent endowment. So you, as an organization, have a fiduciary responsibility to treat it that way. You have to treat it as an endowment. So, at the Community Foundation, we don't help much in keeping this clear. We have two different funds called a permanent endowment and a sustaining endowment. So if you go on our website, download the blank document that's our nonprofit endowment fund, you're going to see a checkbox. I think it's item 4. It's going to ask you, is this a permanent fund or is this a sustaining fund? That's that distinction there. So that's clarity from the donor. That's what we're looking for. What did the donor intend? Did the donor intend this to be permanent? Or did the donor say, I want to give the nonprofit some ability? In this case, in our standard agreement, it's with 2/3 vote of your board and approval by the Community Foundation Board, you could access principal of that fund. So that's the way we set up that fund. Now, here's where it's a little confusing. So if the donor comes to the Community Foundation, sets up a fund, and uses the term endowment, they've created a permanent endowment. They've named whatever organization is going to benefit from that. Conversely, if the donor comes to you, same scenario, they leave you a gift and they say, this is an endowment, no other restrictions or anything, no other explanation on it. They've created a permanent endowment with you. Now you're holding money, and you've got to figure out what to do with it. In some cases, what happens is the nonprofit then comes to the Community Foundation and sets up a sustaining endowment, an endowment that you can take back. But that does not absolve the nonprofit from this arrangement between the donor. So the donor can tell you, make this an endowment, and you have the option. You can go put it in the bank. You can set up a fund at the Community Foundation. You can go set up a brokerage account at Merrill Lynch. Or, you've got different things you can do with it. But that this relationship the donor had. So make sure those kinds of things are clear when you receive a gift like that. Make sure it's reflected in the minutes of your board meetings and things like that, so that future people know, well, what was that? How permanent was that? Is that something we can use? I mean, for crying out loud, it's July and the air conditioner just went out. That's when people start looking at their balance sheet and trying to figure out, where are we going to get some money to replace that $30,000 unit? Make sure that kind of information is clear in there. So there's several stages to endowment. Infancy stage, where you set up a fund and you set these policies in place and try to provide clear guidelines for your board, people that will serve there after you, on what are the objectives of this particular endowment. And then the second stage then is growth. What do we do to grow this? How do we cultivate this endowment? How do we steward gifts into our endowment fund? How do we properly recognize? Are we putting a recognition wall in there for gifts to our endowment? Do they get a stone out in the garden or things like that? How do we steward that? And then finally, maturity. When does that endowment start yielding annual support for your organization? What are the parameters that say, okay, when we hit this certain amount, we want this to start producing, or as we start to build an endowment, we want it, our objective is that it's going to produce a certain amount of income to support our ongoing operations. And then how are you going to continue to receive new gifts into that? What's your fundraising strategy for that? What's your communication method to let people know that your endowment fund exists? So that's a little primer on endowments. Now let's talk about the important stuff. What did Literacy Council do with their endowment, and how can that be instructive for the rest of us today? So again, I'm delighted that y'all are willing to share here, and we'll see how this goes. Again, our panelists there for you. So first question, what caused the Literacy Council to consider setting up an endowment fund in the first place? I think it dates back to 2000. Why was that done? Y'all may draw straws or...
Yeah, the very first reason, is this on?
Yeah, go ahead and flip the button.
Flip the
They're
button.
on the top.
It should be on, yeah, just slide right up to it.
Are they on?
Would y'all turn your microphones off so I couldn't hear you?
Okay, I'll let you worry about that. Is that on?
Yeah, it's on. It's got to lean right into
I
it.
got it.
It's like
Listen to
radio.
this thing. Eat this thing. Really, it wasn't an endowment at first in 2000. It was a reserve fund based on all the training that we were getting from United Way. And all that started from, actually it started from the crisis in Oklahoma when that building got bombed. Y'all remember that? I'm trying to think of the name of the building.
The Murray building.
Yeah, thank you. I can still remember Don Frank standing up in front of a nonprofit saying, so what's happening in Oklahoma now is that nonprofits aren't getting any donations because everybody started giving to that. And she, kind of looked at us like, Don, how she can. So what are you going to do if that happens in Tyler? Of course, all the EDs are in the audience going, oh my God, something else we've got to worry about here. But that was supposed to be a laugh, but it wouldn't work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Anyway, so United Way really encouraged us to set up a reserve fund. And so we just said as a board in 2000, every time we have a surplus at the end of the year, if we have $10,000 or more surplus, we're going to put $10,000 in this reserve fund. And that's what we started doing. But then we got more serious about it in 2010.
Yeah. So between 2000 and 2010, how was the endowment viewed by the organization?
We never touched it. It was an emergency fund.
Yeah.
And we always viewed it that way.
Yeah.
And Nancy, didn't one donor give a rather sizable gift to help get it started?
I believe that was Miss Clements giving $50,000, I think. And Miss Freeman gave 10. So if Randy Childers helped us with that.
So then what caused you to reevaluate in 2010?
Now, I don't want to dominate this conversation. So if you want to say, or you want me to say? Well, you can take it.
So we had a strategic planning meeting with Dawn Franks, and we covered many, many topics, and one of those was finance. And as a result of the strategic planning committee, Dawn felt that we needed to have form a finance committee and really look at the sources and uses of our funds and the variations in gifts every year from year to year, and just really massage all of those numbers. And so I headed that committee, and we looked at the numbers for a year, and it was very enlightening. At the end of that process, it was so clear that what we needed was an endowment, because Literacy Council gets a lot of money from government funding. We get a lot of money from donors. You have good years, you have bad years. So, you know, there were so many things that cause fluctuation in our donations that we receive. And so we had the endowment, but we decided that we would purpose to make that endowment something more than what it was, and really capitalize on the endowment and grow it and everything.
So you had, just for historical perspective, fund was started in 2000 at the Community Foundation. There may have been other funds on the books at the Literacy Council, but they set up with us just one of these basic endowment agreements. So it said ordinary distributions defined as 5% of the prior December 31 balance of the fund. It also said extraordinary distributions, anything over 5%, this requires 2/3 vote of the board of the Literacy Council and approval by the Community Foundation Board. So that was what was in place for that first one. When you reevaluated in 2010, it was split then into 3 different funds. So what process did y'all go through, or you just explained the process, sorry. What were your roles in that process as an executive director and then as board members, trying to figure out what process we're going to follow and what we ultimately want to accomplish with the strategic plan and the endowment?
Okay, well, my role was just doing whatever the board told me. Well, just giving them, I think the staff's role, I know the staff's role was always giving them pertinent information that was understandable, the trends, who gave all the time, who gave sporadically, when it was up, when it was down. And that was the kind of thing that the staff continues to collect to make sure that they see that.
And I have to say, Nancy and the staff were so cooperative in the whole process. So if you talk about building an endowment, the most important thing is the executive director has to be completely on board. And I can't say enough about Nancy. She would let us, Tracy and Fritter and myself, just sort of get in a little room and scheme and try to figure out what it was we needed. And we pop up with an idea, and she would validate it or give us some other direction. But I would say most of the time she really definitely validated, you know, the things that we were working on. But it was, you know, a process of a lot of scheming behind the scenes, not scheming, but just trying to figure out what we wanted to do, because none of us had ever developed an endowment before. And we were all just trying to figure this thing out. And with the help of a lot of information that we resourced, lots and lots of information that we resourced, and kind of a vision for where we wanted to take it, and the support of Nancy. And, you know, we came up with something I think that really worked well for us.
It helped a lot because Michelle's background is in finance.
That did help a lot.
She was also really our vision person. She could see into the goal, which was great for the wonky types to start trying to figure out how to make the goal happen. And that was, but we looked very carefully carefully at our finances and decided we had really three needs. One was for Nancy to have access to cash, when a grant wouldn't come forward in time, wouldn't pay off in time. And so we had to spend the money and then got reimbursed. So we fixed one fund that she could use for cash flow. And then a second for what we call our rainy day fund, where some catastrophe happened, like, it should be the $30,000 air conditioner, although we don't have our own building, but something like that. And then a third fund that is our permanent fund that we hope will generate enough to help supplement programs or offset fluctuations in giving or government financing.
And the skeleton for those three funds were in place. They were just held in different places, so in banks. And one thing that we really purpose to do is to get it with the East Texas Communities Foundation. I mean, we researched other places to keep our money, but we were so impressed with the Communities Foundation. They streamlined everything for us. But that way we would get a rate of return on our money that's in our rainy day fund, in our the cash flow fund. So it was nice to get more return on our money, having it at the Communities Foundation, better than the money market funds.
And plus, I think it eases the burden on the staff, because they're not having to worry about moving money around or watching interest rates.
Now, I will say, the fund of the Community Foundation predates both me and Michelle. So we were not on commission for the fund that was at the Community Foundation. But Michelle was on the board of the Community Foundation after the crash of 2008 and the recovery in 2009 and 10. And there was some stuff going on there that informed your view of endowments as well. Can you explain that? We won't name names. We'll protect the innocent.
So, you think you know where you're headed, and it all seems pretty simple. And then you gain these realizations the more you get into the information about things that could happen. And you want to put in stopgaps to prevent those things. And so, strangely, at the time there were 2 or 3 organizations that drained their endowment. And it was a little shocking to us to think that we would go to our donors and we would ask them for money for long term, and then somehow those donor wishes were not sacrosanct, and the donors and the endowment would be drained, because you have to honor your donors' wishes. So we set out to put in extra language into the standard endowment format, so that it would prevent misuse of that money down the line, so that it wouldn't be drained and used for other things and that were more of a short-term nature rather than a long-term nature. And Nancy was very helpful and supportive of having it done that way. It was, so we kind of...
Hal was too, although he did mention the word draconian at least once or twice. When we were setting it up. But we wanted a clear path for the boards going forward, because we don't intend to be here for the rest of our lives. But we hope the Literacy Council will be here as long as there are people who need its services in Smith County. And we want future boards to know what our donors wanted done with these funds. So that was very, very important to us.
So in a nutshell, back to this 2/3 vote, what we observed is how easy that is to get. How easy it is for you to get 2/3 of your vote. And we require it to be 2/3 of everybody listed on your board, not just people that show up at that particular meeting. So that's a threshold. I mean, the Senate has to get 2/3 vote to override the president's veto, and the House as well. So it sounded pretty firm, but we observed how easy it was, and y'all thought up some great language to, again, communicate to future boards how serious you are about the endowment. Backtracking a little bit on the early in the process. In your opinion, Nancy, would any of this have happened without board members driving that? Yeah.
There might be some situations where EDs have enough time to do that, I don't know, but this ED could never have taken it on. It had to be board driven.
Yeah.
It was absolutely critical that it was.
I'll say in the 10 years I've been at the Community Foundation, it's typically not just an ED that approaches me about an endowment. It could sometimes it's just a board member who's coming to us and saying, hey, I've been asked to check this out. Sometimes it's an ED that says, hey, I've got a board member, 2 or 3 that are very interested in this. And I recognize there's so much our executive directors have to do that if this thing's not on fire, you're not necessarily gonna touch it. What I try to reiterate with that transfer of wealth deal is the transfer of those types of dollars is happening. And I don't want you to miss out on those opportunities. I want you to take advantage of those and know that it's a different kind of ask, it's a different kind of donor, and it's a fund that's going to be here for the future of your organization. And I'm probably completely off track now. What were some of those specific issues that you addressed in that process of recreating your endowment fund?
Are you referring to the parameters we put around it?
Yeah.
What do y'all want to take
And
that?
why you set some of those parameters?
Well,
You want me to? Yeah, you're good.
we did set it up as basically a sustaining endowment so that there can be access to the principal, but we did put limitations on it. And, we did allow the future boards to take loans from it on a 3/4 majority vote of directors, or even up to 100% if that took a unanimous vote. But we wanted it to be a little bit harder than to access the funds, just because at the time, and I don't know this from any board service, but there were rumors floating around about different nonprofits, spending down their endowments, and so we wanted to protect them.
Plus, if we borrow from the endowment at 3/4 votes, we can only do it once every 7 years, and we must pay it back. And that is in writing.
No, so you see some of those right here. So in
Yeah.
addition, we had, in the previous slide, there were 2 parameters. It's either ordinary, up to 5%, or extraordinary, anything over 5%. They came back in their primary endowment fund, which they renamed the Literacy Council Tyler Adult Literacy Endowment. It makes ordinary distributions up to 5% annually. It requires now 2 signatures, not just Nancy saying, we need an endowment fund, but somebody else on the board, an officer of the board, concurring to that. And then anything over 5%, but up to 20%, so they put kind of a second level in there. That requires then 3/4 of the board and a simple majority by our board, and that's only allowed once every 7 years.
I think we were anticipating something like the Oklahoma City bonding or the downturn in 2008 when we set that up. There might be some years where the bottom drops out.
I think that 7 years kind of biblical, isn't it?
Jubilee.
And then the last parameter was anything above 20%. Anything above 20% of the balance of the fund requires 100% of the board's approval. So any one board of director can thwart that project, and then the simple majority of the community foundation to approve that. That also is allowed once every 7 years. And then underlying all of this, there's a phrase that they add in there that's beautiful. The fund is intended to be permanent, and any amount over 5%, which is withdrawn, should be repaid as soon as practicable. So not just what are the rules on touching it, but it's intended to be repaid, and everybody henceforth and forevermore needs to know money's got to go back in there. And they also put a parameter on there because they were growing their fund that no withdrawals were permitted until the fund had a minimum of $250,000 in there, and then they actually raised that.
We raised it to $1 million.
Yeah.
So you want to demonstrate the stability of the organization and the responsibility of the organization by setting up an endowment, and all of that is really good. And at some point you realize that you're working on something that's much bigger than yourself, and you realize that there is a future that's beyond what we see, and these are permanent endowments, and that word alone is a little bit daunting. We really want to do what's best for the future, and so it caused us to be very, protective of our donors and their wishes. And one thing that's tricky about an endowment is, while we love what it brings with the organization as far as stability, we think it's also very important for the board to remain incentivized about seeking annual fund donations. And sometimes if a board knows that they've got a certain amount coming from an endowment, it disincentivizes them a little bit, thinking that, oh, we can just tap into this endowment money. And we wanted to make sure we demonstrated in the language of the document that it is not something that is an easy fallback. It's for a major event. And so that's the reason why we did all of this is, so but it is the tricky part about an endowment, is that it can disincentivize people from going after annual fund if they think, oh, well, we can just pay for this with endowment money, instead of working your donors a little bit harder.
And then, once you had these new kind of rules in place and the three different buckets that you wanted to use, did you have an idea of what you wanted that endowment to become and plans to try to achieve that?
We did. So we came about it formulaically. We knew what our expenses were, and I wasn't the one knowing this. We just researched it and a lot of information to come up with a plan that said that 15% of our expenses would be provided for if we made a 5% withdrawal from our endowment, and that helped us establish our goal. And so once we set about our goal, then we had to figure out how to get there. But it wasn't just a number that we pulled out of the sky. We came about that number formulaically, and it was something that was sort of best practices in endowments. So 15% of our annual expenses.
So we looked at operating expenses and what it would take to replace 15% of those. We were hopeful that we wouldn't have more than that kind of fluctuation. So then we figured out how much money it would take to yield 15%. And that's something we'll have to continue to evaluate